Institute, and also from Roseanne Winberg and Tracy Bleakley. Are there any other apologies? Cliff, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Yes, from Councillor Gerald Kelly.
Thank you. So we now turn to the minutes of the last meeting. Does anyone have any corrections to make, please? And if not, thank you. I will assume that we're all happy with them. So we move to agenda item 2, which is the budget update. And Ian Gallen is going to present this. The Chief Executive of West Suffolk is going to present this.
Thanks, Chair. Morning, everyone. So I shall be very quick. This gives you your budget update. You currently have it's £7,017,000 unspent. So subject to your discussions and any decisions today, we will update that budget position. So that's your current budget.
So thank you for that. Does anyone have any questions or comments on the budget? Please raise your virtual hand. So no. So thank you, Mr. Gallen. That was short and sweet. And we'll move on to agenda item 3, International Trade Managers Update. So that's an update from the Suffolk Chamber of Commerce on international trade managers. And Michael Chapman and Koyas Mia are going to introduce this update. And here's Koyas.
Hi. Good morning, and thank you. So just like to share my screen, please, with the presentation, if that's okay. If I could get this. Can we see the screen? Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. Yep. Excellent. Perfect. Thank you. So yeah, that's fine. So we have circulated our sort of background as international trade managers and how we are supporting the Suffolk businesses in advance of this meeting. I would just like to kind of add to this the uniqueness on the innovative approach in supporting Suffolk businesses by the Suffolk public sector leaders in having international trade managers on the ground, where we've got DIT or DBT now, who have gone in-house. So what we'd like to do is share some case studies in terms of how we have supported Suffolk businesses. Yeah. Perfect. So these are some of the case studies where we have helped promote and support Suffolk businesses on their international trade journey. So we have a West Suffolk-based business specialising in garden features. First-time exporters. They wanted to take advantage of the potential opportunities available in the global markets to grow their business. We supported the business with export readiness, identifying key areas of business development, market research, so looking at trends, risks and opportunities when exporting to US. We worked with the businesses. We worked with the business on their export strategy, providing market analysis and a strategic route to market for their products going to the US. And the business is now getting ready to ship their very first consignment. There's another East Suffolk-based business, leading providers in agri, data and decision support services. They have always had an interest in expanding into new global markets, and they see the potential opportunities that they can take advantage of. However, they have been reserved due to the understanding of exporting as well as potential challenges. We have been working with that business to get them export ready by advising and supporting the business on export procedures and export planning. This has provided the business with the confidence to explore further in conducting market research for selling their products and services to Australia. And then we've got an Ipswich-based water treatment specialist. They used to export historically, but over time their priority had changed. So we are working with the business in exploring different avenues in growing their business internationally. So through market research, we identified US as a potential market for their product. And due to the type of products that they will be exporting, there are various regulations that the business needs to adhere to. So we are supporting the business on understanding the regulatory requirements and market entry options to US. The business has benefited from like key market connections and contacts with a clear market strategy to exporting or to start exporting. They have another East Suffolk-based manufacturer of safety equipment. So when we had the UK-EU FTA transition, this led them to having a split warehousing to save on the costs and the complex regulation. The business has now brought their UK stocks in-house and are looking at the options to do the same with the EU warehousing. We have advised the business on warehousing and product movement between the UK and the EU, taking into consideration of the duties, taxes, and the preferential tariff treatments. This has helped the business make an informed decision, which otherwise could have been costly. And our collaborative work and strategic sort of working relationship with the British Chamber of Commerce's global business network has helped form strategic partnerships with new global emerging markets, which has opened up an opportunity for West Suffolk-based business in exporting its products to Uzbekistan. We are working with the business in facilitating key connections and contacts in Uzbekistan. This has helped the business identify new opportunities in new global markets, which otherwise may have gone unnoticed, adding to their growth and their revenue. And then we have a mid-Suffolk-based manufacturer exporting hardware and software globally. We provided bespoke training for a team of 15 delegates in understanding the methods of payments and the types and the level of security of the payment and the different types of letters of credits and how they can be administered. This has helped the business manage their payment risks, as the team will now be able to review their customer's letter of credit to avoid any kind of issues and delays in payment. I will now pass over to Mike to go through the next slide.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for holding the pen on the slides. So what I'm going to do is just to talk through a couple of case studies when the slide appears. Thank you. Just some other examples which relate to my area of sort of work on trade policy, and you've got the background deck, which also sort of gives you that wider context of the strategic work that's been done on the trade policy side. But here you've got some examples of different geographies, different types of sectors and businesses, and the sort of different types of interventions. The first one is a family-run, well-established Suffolk grain merchant. It's looking to expand significantly, increase its turnover. For the last 3 years, they've been looking for moving from 6 million to 21 million to 60 million, and they're looking to do that through export growth. Now, the type of assistance and intervention that I've been providing for this particular business is in a sense acting like a strategic coach. When I started talking to this business, they realised that there was a lot of areas they did not understand, a lot of areas of policy and regulation that were overlapping. So they asked if it was possible that if I could meet with them on a rolling quarterly basis, so every 90 days, I go to the business, have a meeting with the chief financial officer and the head of customs brokerage, within the business and talk about a whole range of things. So, for instance, the business has established a subsidiary in Rotterdam, so it can actually therefore cater to the EU market. It's looking at potential opportunities at Freeport East. It's also looking to expand its existing footprint and premises within Suffolk. So it gives you an idea of that type of flavour, type of sort of, you know, much more sort of a strategic approach to actually assisting businesses on a multiple level of issues. Another area of work that I think is important is actually just looking at regulatory and policy and extrapolating, you know, the insight that what's been going on, and in this case it's actually about supporting an important sector of the Suffolk economy, which of course is logistics, shipping, customs. We know with the Port of Felixstowe and the wider Ipswich area, we do have a lot of freight forwarders and customs brokers. They themselves do a lot of work through their trade bodies and with others, so they are extremely knowledgeable. But even here, sometimes the companies fall foul and they don't really appreciate what's necessarily coming around the corner in terms of policy and policy changes. And this is a sector that's going to go through quite a bit of change in the next 2 years. But one example would be the fact that I've been working with number of freight forwarders, particularly with the introduction of the new developing countries trading scheme. So this was introduced by the government, and there was some particular coding issues on how you actually sort of get the preferential tariffs for exporters from developing countries to come in. Now, see, with a lot of freight forwarders, they are actually working on behalf of the exporter and the importer at the same time. So they're doing two parts of that whole process. So they're not just representing the importer, they could also be representing the exporter from a developing country. And that was one of the issues that they were facing. How do they actually unblock that coding issue, which we managed to resolve? So it's a bit of a technical thing. Also, working with the sector means that when I'm talking to businesses, we can then actually use that connection to provide businesses with extra support and advice. So in this case, there was a Sudbury-based global exporter, previous winner of the Queen's Award for exporting. So knew everything about exporting and very good. Over, I think 60% of their turnover is export market, but limited knowledge about imports. And they had a problem where they had a good that had to come back. So return goods relief from the Czech Republic. So I went through with the business. They said, look, this is what you need to think about. This is what you need to do. But we give free and impartial advice, but we can't give, the advice to actually say to the business, well, you can really need to get technical support here. So you need to go and sort it out. But that's a commercial decision. So you have to make that decision. But what we can do is provide the information, the guidance, and the network connections, and provided some recommendations for them to go and actually go and speak to a freight forwarder who's a specialist in this area, and they can resolve that issue for them. Another example, so again, it's something that's related to another sector, which is the potential for green trade. Now, this follows a piece of work that I was involved with other stakeholder partners, including Suffolk County University of Suffolk, and we were looking at the potential opportunities for green trade. And here I've been working with another Lowestoft-based renewable energy service operator. So it comes under that sort of wide sort of definition of green trade. But here in particular, this is an operations and maintenance provider for the offshore wind sector, of course. It also is actually a Dutch-based company which has a footprint in Suffolk and in Lowestoft, and actually their hydrogen boats actually work both in the Netherlands, Germany, France and Poland. So what this business has been facing is actually the friction of how do they actually get their boats to be serviced and move them from GB to the EU and specifically to the Netherlands. And they were having problems here with customs. And actually, this is something which is ongoing. And I was actually I was talking to the business this morning, and they've actually had another issue that that's been confronted to them about frictions and increasing, costs, and how do they actually sort of tackle these. And another area, of course, is the new EU carbon border adjustment mechanism. Because it's hydrogen, it's actually deemed to be some part of this mechanism, so they have to report to the Dutch customs authorities, the competent authority, actually how much hydrogen is actually used within their product. And I think we're going through this and thinking it's actually not really relevant to that particular sort of business. So there's a lot of things to iron out, but the issue here is actually really about understanding supply chain. So it's actually understanding how imports, exporting, and how businesses, which might have also, there may be foreign-based businesses globally, or EU-based businesses that are also based here. They have to understand, the sort of intricacies of actually what's happening in trade today at this moment. And my guess is this problem that came up this morning is related to potentially a misunderstanding by the European colleagues within the business, the fact that this particular business can't register itself as an exporter under what's known under the EU as the REX system, because we're no longer part of that system. So next week we'll be working to try to actually resolve those issues. Another area, just to point out, of course, is trade does come across in a number of different guises, and sort of here been working with a couple, or previously working with some West Suffolk businesses, e-commerce. And the potential for e-commerce is massive, and there's a significant growth market within Asia Pacific, and India in particular, and also places like North America. So we've got businesses who want to get established within that e-commerce global economy, but they need to understand how they actually use different platforms. How do they actually account for VAT, product compliance issues, and customs complexities? So it's, while there's a massive business opportunity, it also can be quite complex to understand those regulatory requirements. And for instance, the EU has its own now version of what it does in relation to its e-commerce platforms. In the US, for instance, it's something that's not necessarily regulated at the federal level. It's done at individual state level, so you have to be very careful upon which markets in the US you look at. But as I said, the opportunities are there, and then within the new free trade agreements that have been agreed, so for instance with Australia and then potentially one with India, there is significant opportunities for Suffolk businesses who want to develop through e-commerce. And the final one is just the case of saying, well, what's the point of doing all this sort of global, regulatory, policy scanning? Well, in fact, actually, you are able to actually assist a business which is actually facing a particular issue. And here it was, again, a Ipswich-based company that was trying to export, and then suddenly realised that its market was going to be closed down because India had decided to change the rules and put in import restrictions on laptops and computer hardware. Now, India has been trying to protect some of its domestic industry from international competition and certainly from imports. This is something that it's regulating through putting restrictions upon the Indian importers. But here, because we slightly got ahead of the curve and aware, I was able to actually give some confidence to the business to actually say, well, hold on. Actually, if you look at it, the Indian government brought in the necessary legislation, but the following day they then changed their mind and extended it by a month or so. So the deadline was shifted very quickly, and I said, well, can you get your order in first? This is nothing necessarily to do with you, but you've got to talk to your importer and find out, because they're the ones who are going to say, have to put you on a register in India. And subsequently, I think some of the US computer companies have also made some issues, raised some reservations about this. So I think the deadline has been shifted again. But this again shows the fact that when you do get into free trade agreements, it's the devil in the detail. So if we do have a free trade agreement with India, when you're looking at something like laptops and computer hardware and other sectors, there's always going to be those regulatory issues that businesses have to be aware of, and therefore that by taking an approach of actually scanning global regulatory type of issues, we're able to actually flag these up to businesses and potentially head off any particular problems later on. So that's just a whistle-stop tour, just a few of the be several different examples of the types of sectors, businesses, geographies, and interventions that I've undertook in the last 12 months. So maybe next slide, final one slide. And therefore, I think that's us done.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. Are there any questions from the floor? Cliff.
Oh yeah, thanks very much, Neil. Thanks very much, Kaias and Michael, for that presentation. I know that since the UK has left the EU, one particular sector has been very badly hit, and that's the music, live music, and the creative industries in general. And I do know from personal experience of people who found it very difficult now to carry on touring, for example, in Europe. So I wondered if you'd done any work helping to ameliorate those problems.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yes, but frustrating. It was something that was immediately, once the TCA was agreed, it shown that because the fact that the TCA wasn't actually, it was quite light on certain areas, and there's sort of the idea for mobility of particular workers within particular sectors, such as creative and musicians, but also we've actually got, and in Suffolk for some strange reason, also is actually quite expert in the sort of logistic support for bands and orchestras and musicians and theatre, plays, etc. So we've got some big companies that actually specialise. I'm talking to one company. It probably was about a couple of years ago now, but they started off by doing their first piece of work was doing a Bob Marley concert in Corsica, and that's how they started. Yeah, back in the day. So, and they got a fleet of design trucks that put in mega stages for Taylor Swift and for Elton John and etc. And of course, when this happened, they couldn't do it. So they could only go into one country. You couldn't do there's all sorts of complexities, but it did come down to a short-term sort of visa issue, which we didn't have. It went upstairs to government. The government's been trying to negotiate this, and this has been one of the things that's been ongoing with the European Union, because it is, and it's a, as I say, it is a frustration, but both sides need to come up with a working solution. So in the early days, it was pretty dire. It has got better, but it needs to be potentially resolved. And again, one of the other issues that you find is that when dealing with the European Union here, again, the different individual member states look at implementation of directives and policy guidance from the Commission differently. So some of them will take it by the letter and be very, draconian and stopping, while others say a little bit sort of more common sense approach. And the approach, I think, from sort of some of the UK civil servants and this and people in the embassy have also been, let's just take a pragmatic approach, because it actually benefits both sides by allowing our creative industries they are integrated in some respects, and we are missing out from having French performers coming over to the UK and British performers. But it does show you that a little thing can actually have an impact upon a quite important UK sector, and also it is quite significant within the region and within Suffolk.
Okay, thank you for that. And Tim, you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, thanks, Neil, and thanks, Kaias and Michael, for that. That was really interesting. That, and I just wanted to comment. More power to your elbow for what you're doing, because I think it's so important. We all know, whatever one's political view, we need to get the economy motoring, and obviously now is not the time to discuss that, but this will help. And when I don't know how many members you've got in the chamber, but I think it said in the report, was it 50% of them in the recent survey wanted help support for importing and exporting? So if you can fill that gap, at least to some extent, that's really important. And actually picking up on Cliff's point, I hadn't thought of this, but if I've got this right, I had to write this down, the CPATPP, that Trans-Pacific job. I mean, the countries involved in that, was it Canada, Australia, Vietnam, for example, and Japan? There's some pretty big growth prospects there, and anything we can do to help Suffolk businesses get involved with them, I think is good. And having been on business in Japan twice in my previous career, developing those links, that actually does have benefits for cultural exchanges and so on as well, and tourism, which is hugely important for us in Suffolk, and all the added benefits that brings. So I am an enthusiast for that. And you know, I haven't ever come across a company in Suffolk, I'm sure there are some, that's been involved with Uzbekistan. I thought that was fascinating. And the work you're doing with India, a huge economy there. I know it's quite closed in many ways, but if you gents can find ways to help develop that, then very well done. So no, really interesting. So thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any further comments or questions? If not, can we move to the vote on this one? Oh, no, there's no vote on this one. Just an update.
Update.
Thank you very much for that update, which was very interesting.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you again.
Thank you.
So if we could move on to agenda item 4, Transport East overview of strategy and priorities.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chair. Good morning. I'm Andrew Summers, Chief Officer of Transport East. Chair, if it's okay, I've got a slide presentation to share for 10 minutes and then happy to have a discussion after that. Does that sound okay? Okay, slides are just forming now. Excellent. Okay, so the aim of the presentation today is to provide an introduction to Transport East. I know many of you, but some of you I haven't met, so I'd like to provide an overview of who we are and what we do. I'm going to talk through our strategy, which has recently been approved by the Secretary of State for Transport, so that's the transport strategy for the East. I then wanted to run through some of the priority work issues particularly relevant for Suffolk. So I'll talk through strategic connectivity, some of the main issues around rail and road, and how we can work together with you to accelerate some of those. I'd also like to touch on our work on rural mobility and alternative fuels, two topics that are particularly relevant in the East and to Suffolk, and then talk about some next steps. So just going through this in turn, this initial slide sets out what is Transport East. So we are one of 7 subnational transport bodies that are formed across the whole of England. Transport East itself formed in 2018, and it was really local leaders like yourself coming together across the East in the recognition that in the past we haven't had the investment that the East deserves in terms of delivering our goals, and the need to have a single voice across the region to really set out our strategy and what we need to do to deliver those in terms of our priorities. So our local leaders from across Norfolk, Suffolk, Essex, Thurrock and Southend came together, along with LEPs, Chambers of Commerce and Government, National Highways, Network Rail, to form the Transport East Board, which now operates and meets quarterly. I lead a staff team of 8 people that has built up over the last 2 to 3 years to service the partnership. We have a number of roles, and these have expanded over the last few years. We were initially set up to be the single voice for transport in the East, and that is very much the core of what we do. However, the Local Government and Cities Devolution Act 2016 sets out 2 roles for us that we must abide to under the legislation. First is to create and maintain a transport strategy for the East. And then secondly, use that to identify strategic investment priorities and advise the Secretary of State on the priorities for the East of England. We then work closely with National Highways, Network Rail and local authorities to support delivery. And increasingly over the last year, the government have asked us to provide more capacity and capability for our partners, for our local authorities. It should be said that we're unique as a subnational transport body. We're the only one in England that has both the planning authorities and the transport authorities as core parts of our membership. So it does give us a really strong overview of the intersection between land use and transport planning. We're funded 25% through local contributions, and that has leveraged in 75% contributions from national government. So a really good funding arrangement between local and national government there. So hopefully that sets out what Transport East is and what it does. I just wanted to then move on to our strategic priorities. So over the last few years, this has been the core piece of work that Transport East has done, bringing together partners from across the East, nationally and government, to really set out what is it that we want to see delivered in the East of England for transport over the next 20, 30 years to 2050. And it's really recognising here that transport is an enabler for our economic goals, our social goals, and driving down at net zero. It's clear through the work that we've done and through the consultation and the engagement. We spoke to over 2,500 people across the East, and we held a public consultation at which we had over 600 responses from partners across the region. It's clear that we have a unique economy. It's not driven like a Liverpool or Manchester or London by one dominant metropolitan area, but the connectivity between our 75 towns and cities really supports that economic growth. We have a very innovative economy, so a lot of potential for tech, bioscience, pharmaceuticals, etc. The economy is worth about 73 billion pounds, and traditionally has been a net contributor to UK PLC. Of significance, particularly to Suffolk, but the eastern geography is our energy coast. So the Sizewell C coming on board and offshore renewables is a unique, sort of a unique characteristic of our economy, and also our global gateway for trade. So over half of the UK's freight containers come through the ports in the east. Layered on top of that is significant housing and jobs growth. So 500,000 new homes projected in the east of England to 2050. So a significant contribution to the UK economy. And whenever we speak to government, we always try to get across the diagram on the right hand side that investing here supports wider UK prosperity, wider UK growth. In our transport strategy, therefore, we set out 4 strategic priorities. Firstly, decarbonisation to net zero, and I've got a slide a bit later on that talks about this, but transport decarbonisation is arguably most challenging in the east compared to other regions, considering the amount of freight that we have and the amount of rural trips that we have to make by the private car. Connecting growing towns and cities, both within our region, but better connectivity to other places in the UK, the Midlands, the North, London, Oxford, Cambridge, etc. Energising rural and coastal communities is our 3rd priority. 1 in 3 people live in rural areas, 1 in 5 live on the coast. And there's a huge potential for enhancing their accessibility and rural economy as well. And fourthly, unlocking international gateways. We've got 13 ports, 3 international airports. We have 2 free ports, obviously Freeport East and Thames Freeport, but it's not just those ports. Other ports like Lowestoft, Ipswich have considerable contribution to the local and national economy. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour of our strategic priorities. Now, what we do at Transport East is work with partners to really drive forward working with government, working with ministers on behalf of the region, that is really going to unlock some of these opportunities. There's a lot of work that we do, and it's not possible for me to talk about all of that today. I just wanted to pick up 3 of the live issues that I think SBSL should be aware of. That's strategic connectivity, rural accessibility, and our work on alternative fuels. So if we first go to strategic connectivity, I just wanted to recap the approach that we set out in our transport strategy here. We said in our strategy that the East needs better inter-urban connectivity, particularly east-west, where long journey times makes it very difficult for businesses, goods and people to be able to access the places they want to go. But alongside that connectivity between our places where people live and work, we need to connect our 13 ports and 3 international airports to the UK. Within the towns and cities as well, we need better sustainable connectivity. A lot of that is the work of the local authorities, but really helping them with buses, walking and cycling. And this needs to be integrated into a more cohesive, customer-focused approach. And at Transport East, we bring together all the different modes to make sure that it makes sense from a strategic perspective. So I just wanted to run through some priorities I think SBSL should be aware of. The first one is a slide or 2 on rail. We published our State of Rail report in 2023. This was a compilation of all the evidence and challenges around rail across the East of England region. And what we set out was quite a concerning picture of rail currently not being able to deliver the outcomes we want to see in the future. And we boiled it down to about 5 key issues. So we need to see better east-west connectivity. We need to see better inter-urban connectivity, both between our towns and cities, but also places like London and Cambridge. Frequency was seen as a major challenge in the East. A lot of our network can't cope with trains running at either quarter hourly or half hourly services, which is the type of service that you need to encourage people to move from the private car to rail. Freight obviously was a huge issue as well. A lot of our freight coming through Felixstowe in particular needs to go across country or down through London and up the West Coast line, and I'll show that in a bit. And then accessing airports through surface transport. Interestingly for Suffolk, the diagram on the right hand side summarises that the challenges, and what you can see in particular is that the east-west rail line through Suffolk encapsulates a wide variety of challenges, including journey time, frequency, capacity, and the need for better high frequency services. So what we're starting to see here from a Suffolk perspective is quite a compelling case for rail investment. And therefore, moving on to what we collectively need to be doing about this, I'll just talk through some of the immediate priorities that we're working on. So there's two key things I wanted to bring to your attention here: the need to progress Ely and Hawley quickly, and then East-West Rail. Now, the region, this group, partners across the East MPs, have been campaigning for years for improvements to Ely and Hawley Junction. We had the good news within the Prime Minister's Network North announcement in October 2023 that they were minded to progress both of these. Now, this is off the back of the government cancelling the northern leg of High Speed 2 between Manchester and Birmingham, and that funding, circa £36 billion, being used on alternative projects elsewhere. Most of those are going to be delivered in the Midlands and the North, but because of the considerable advocacy that we've collectively done for a number of years around Ely, it was really good news that Ely and Hawley were outlined in that. The benefits are significant. It takes about 100,000 lorries a year, for example, off roads like the A14, with considerable carbon reduction benefits. And for passengers, it would double services such as Ipswich to Peterborough. Now, I think the point I want to make here about that is not a done deal. And I think there's still scope for groups such as SBSL to continue to make the case to government to say that funding for that scheme needs to be delivered sooner rather than later. The funding for the HS2 scheme that was cancelled is mainly 2029-2030 funding, but for this priority, the region needs to see Ely delivered sooner rather than later. So you may wish to consider writing, for example, to ministers to set out the case for investment that Suffolk thinks we have for this scheme, to ensure that the voice from the East is coming through really strongly. The second rail scheme that I wanted to bring to your attention here, now, whilst the works are taking place outside of the patch, so between Bletchley and Cambridge, there is opportunity once that scheme is delivered for services from Ipswich, Bury St Edmunds, other places in the east, all the way through to Milton Keynes to Oxford. It opens up a whole new route of possibilities. At present, the preferred route for that missing link has been identified. What we know, though, is more capacity is going to be required on the line in Suffolk to make the most of those services. We know that there will be a public consultation in 2024 on that preferred route, and that's the opportunity for us as the region to make the case for better investment on the line in Suffolk. The East-West Rail Eastern Board, which Transport East is secretariat for, chaired by Councillor Alexander Nichol of Suffolk County Council, and I believe all of the local authorities here are members of that board, will be the focal point for making the case for that section. But I think it's worth bringing to the attention here of SBSL that we need to put our full weight behind supporting the case through that process as it opens up in 2024. So I just wanted to emphasise here, there's two key rail priorities here from a strategic perspective that we need to be focused on. It's not just rail, however. Roads are fundamental, as we know, to prosperity in the east of England and our contribution more widely. I wanted to update you on two things to bring to your attention. Firstly, the strategic road network, and this is the network that is run and operated by National Highways. There is a pipeline that National Highways and government have for future schemes in the east of England and across the country, known as the RIS, so the Roads Investment Strategy. Conversations are currently taking place with government at the minute on the content of the third road investment strategy, that is 2025 to 2030, and then subsequently RIS 4 period, 2030 to 2035. Now, the issue of concern to us collectively is that the ministerial statement earlier in this year that the schemes that we had earmarked for RIS 3, and that includes the A14 Copdock and the A11 Fiveways, being pushed back to the RIS 4 period. Now, we collectively know that those schemes are incredibly important for the region, particularly the A14 Copdock, getting that done in time to support some of our NSIPs, for example, Sizewell, enhancing our role to access freight as well. So this group may wish to consider again, if it hasn't already, ensuring that his voice is coming through clearly to government on that. I should also note the sort of good news that we've had more recently through the Network North announcement, the scheme that Suffolk County Council is promoting, the A12 improvements north of Ipswich, was included in that programme, and I believe that work is accelerating on that as well. That has been one of a number of schemes that Transport East has consistently advocated for through its advice to government, and so part of our role here is to work with you to make sure that these priorities are coming through really clearly. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour of current road and rail investment priorities that this board may wish to advocate more on. But it's not just schemes that are happening at the minute. Part of the work of Transport East is looking ahead to 2050. So I wanted to make you aware of a major piece of work that we're doing this year and next year on our connectivity study. We know we need to deliver net zero, maximise economic growth, support housing and jobs growth, and the current pipeline of investment that we have won't get us there. So what we're doing is looking at the next generation of strategic transport. We're working collaboratively with yourselves, your authorities and members across the East, looking very much at a multimodal approach for the future. And what we're aiming for here is to inform a regional campaign going into the next comprehensive spending review of what types of things we're going to need to develop with investment funding over the next few years, so that the pipeline to the period 2050 is genuinely moving us towards our investment priorities. So a piece of work there that may come across your desks over the next 6 months. Recognising the time, I just wanted to touch on 2 final priority pieces of work that we're doing at the minute. So rural mobility was one of the things that when we went through our public consultation, people in the East said, this is a real challenge for us, we must tackle. As I said earlier, 1/3 of our residents live in rural communities, and what the diagram on the right shows is the extent of transport deserts in the east of England. So the yellow areas are basically places where people cannot access education, training, skills by any means apart from the private car, and this creates a significant amount of social exclusion. We've overlaid this as well with digital connectivity, so the areas of dark and light orange indicate increasingly worse areas of digital connectivity as well. And so what we're seeing a picture of here is there's a lot of people live in the East that have both poor digital and transport connectivity. Our strategy therefore sets out an approach to tackle this. We need to do more to help people access places where they can deliver those outcomes, be that through passenger transport, be that through lift sharing, a range of interventions as set out in our strategy. But it's not just transport that's going to solve this. Local provision of services in those local areas allows people to access more things locally, as well as supporting digital rollout. And so what Transport East has done over the last year with support from government is to create a rural mobility centre of excellence. And what we're really anticipating is that you and your partners can tap into this to help tackle some of those challenges locally. So this is a partnership of local authorities, academia and businesses that performs a number of functions. It has an advocacy role. For example, I appeared at the Transport Select Committee in Parliament a few months ago to set out the case for investment in rural areas in the East. And it's also an evidence-based approach at a strategic scale. So it allows us to collate and share best practice from across the country and elsewhere for applicability in the East. Research, so we've done a survey of all parishes in the east of England, for example, and we can have that data output at both district and county level. And we've just completed a call for evidence and a public inquiry, an inquiry to understand the challenges, and we're taking those recommendations to Parliament in January 2024. So I guess this is to emphasise that we've heard a lot of the issues that you and others have raised around rural mobility. That report will be available very soon. And indeed, if any of you want to get involved in the advocacy work around that to Parliament, again, I think that's something that SPSL may want to get involved with. Now, I'll just move on to the final issue that we're working on, and then happy to have a quick discussion. So in terms of alternative fuels, this feeds back to the underlying challenge that we've set out in our transport strategy, that the East is not going to hit net zero from transport as things stand at the minute. The diagram here points to future net zero trajectories. The black line there is basically a business as usual. If we carry on as we are, we get nowhere near reduction of CO2. The pink line is what happens if you deploy the Department for Transport's approach in the region. Again, that doesn't get us to net zero in the East because of the challenges we face around freight and rural mobility. So we need to go harder in the East at net zero. And the green and the yellow lines there denote increasingly ambitious scenarios. The green one is keeping on track with the UK 6 carbon budget. And then the yellow line is an aggressive shift, going even further than the Paris Agreement. So the strategy sets out the need to both reduce the need for carbon intensive travel where possible, shift modes, and both of those we're working really hard with our local authorities to help them do that. The area of strategic activity that I think that Transport East can add value here as a partnership is around alternative fuels. So that is the transition where possible to electricity, to hydrogen, or to other. And there's a lot of work, particularly around hydrogen, around some of the clusters in the East, and Freeport East doing a lot of work about this. I just wanted to quickly touch on one piece of work that we've completed over the last few months, and that's an EV Ready tool. What this does is for each district and for each county in the east of England, it identifies the future demand for electric vehicles and allows you to plan a growth trajectory. It sets out high and low scenarios, and it also sets out the case for investment in the East and how urgently we need to tackle this. So, for example, if we want to meet the high trajectory for rollout of EVs, to keep us on track with the 2030 and 2035 targets from government, we essentially need a 10-fold increase in electric vehicle charging infrastructure from now to 2025 to meet that demand. What it also shows on the diagram on the right-hand side are those areas with the highest propensity to switch first. So it's a really useful planning aid, and it takes into factors such as grid availability, which I know is one of the major challenges around how quickly you can roll out EVs, and where the populations are that might want to deliver first. So the red areas on that map are the areas in the east of England and on Suffolk that have the highest propensity to switch first. And this is very much part of our role in supporting prioritisation, allowing us to divert resources to those areas that will have highest impact first, and then getting those areas that won't have the highest impact first ready for the future waves of investment. So hopefully those three areas were useful. I just wanted to summarise then with a slide that might lead into the discussion in terms of immediate, short, medium term priorities that we might want to work on collectively. Our advice would be, in the short term, advocacy to progress some of those major investment priorities is particularly useful. So Ely and Hawley in going now to government to say, can you start to unlock the funding that's outlined in the Network North report to really start progressing both those Ely and Hawley schemes, recognising the amount of time it will take to deliver them. And likewise on our national highways projects, with COPDOC and A11 currently projected to be pushed back to post 2030. Can this group do anything around supporting the case for doing those earlier? In the medium term, it'd be really good to work with you on our rural mobility and alternative fuels work, and we can forward the emerging reports of those. And then we've got our minds very much on the single voice going into the general election and the next comprehensive spending review. making sure we have a solid case for investment from the East, and that's making sure that we reflect your priorities as we go into that phase. So understanding clearly what your priorities are at a strategic scale is going to be really important. Chair, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and very happy to talk about those recommendations and any questions from the group. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Andrew, for that very interesting and thought-provoking set of slides. And certainly I've picked up a few things there. I'm sure we will all be supportive of advocacy, because surely we all want these things. And it will be interesting to see if we can work together to develop a solid case for investment. I have a number of hands, so I have Matthew Hicks up first.
Thanks, and thanks, Andrew, for the presentation. I think Andrew's probably too modest to say, but actually Transport East is really well recognised nationally as being an exemplar in the field. So I think a credit to the team for all the work they do. Also a big credit that the Ely and Hawley junction has come to the top of the list after many years of work and lobbying. I would absolutely support any sort of SPSL voice to encourage government to move that forward at pace, because the sooner it's done, the better for our residents, the better for the A14, and obviously better transport links. So I would certainly encourage that. Same goes for Copdock and Five Ways. There's been a lot of talk about those junctions, but the need to upgrade them, and again, I think the sooner we can get on that, the better. So I really just want to thank Andrew for all the work that Transport East do. They are a hugely well-run and respected organisation and are a great voice for Suffolk. And I'm absolutely supportive of those recommendations for further work or making our voice louder on those points.
Yeah, thank you for that, Matthew. John Ward.
Just to reiterate everything Matthew said and to thank Andrew. It's great that Ely and Hawley now have funding earmarked, but it is disappointing we don't yet have a firm timetable, and so anything that we can do in terms of advocacy to get that firmed up and the sooner the better is going to be welcome. Particularly, of course, as we must remember, as SPSL, we do have £1 million earmarked to Hawley Junction, so hopefully that will help back up our advocacy with the MPs. Also, it is disappointing that Copdock and Five Ways are in RIS 4 now, but whatever we can do to keep the visibility on both of those will help. But I would also like to make a plea for something else, and that is the A12 between Ipswich and Colchester, particularly the junctions between East Bergholt and Stratford St Mary. They are totally inadequate and are quite dangerous now, and something does need to be done. And if we can keep up some advocacy on promoting that as a potential future project, that would be very welcome for the residents who live along that corridor.
Yeah, thank you for that. Cliff.
Thanks very much, Neil. Andrew, thank you very much. And I echo what the other two speakers have said about the work you do. And I think you must be very resilient and very optimistic people, given the failure of the current government to invest properly in infrastructure across the whole country, in particular in East Anglia, and from our point of view in Suffolk. And although it's really heartening to know that the Ely scheme has been given the nod to go ahead, it would be nice to actually know that it was going ahead rather than just being potentially going ahead. So I think absolutely we must keep the pressure up on the government. Although I have to say, given that our MPs have kept that pressure up, and given that they're in the same party as the government, and given that it hasn't really actually led to any concrete results, I think we just need to be very strong and very determined to keep our morale up and not give up. One thing I would like to see, and you have talked about it a little bit in the presentation, but perhaps adding to that would be to make sure that we get proper infrastructure for active travel. And so sort of be clear what I mean about that. I spent a summer holiday in Holland, and obviously as a cyclist, spending time in Holland is probably not a good idea if you live in Britain, because you come back and realise how, I wouldn't even say our infrastructure is inadequate. Our infrastructure in terms of cycling is almost non-existent, in that we just have to rely on painted sides of the road. So I think, you know, we really do need to see a lot more work put into creating proper infrastructure for active travel, and I'd very much like us, or like you, Transport East, and also us as SBSL, to put more effort into that. So yeah, thank you very much, Andrew, for the work you've done, and keep up the good work. And I look forward to the incoming government being a bit more receptive to the ideas that we're putting forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Cliff. We've got Chris Bally up next, or East Suffolk anyway.
Yeah, it's me actually. Yeah, thanks. Very good presentation. Just thinking long term, elderly people in my ward in Southwold have a car that they hardly ever use because the hospitals are an hour away and that sort of thing. So, you know, long term, we really not just about getting alternative fuels. We need to reduce the number of vehicles. If we had a properly integrated public transport system on demand, so it's running when people wanted, maybe driverless with 5G, that's the sort of thing I think that could make the real difference in terms of transport and carbon emissions.
Thank you for that. And Andrew?
No.
Andrew Mellon. So.
Oh, sorry, I think Tim was ahead of me.
Yeah, go on, Andy. I'll go after you. It's all right, no problem.
Cock up on my part.
Okay, so yeah, thanks for the presentation. Really interesting to see all of that. As a Green council leader, I'm probably going to make a couple of points that won't be agreed with by everyone, but I'll make them anyway, if that's okay. Obviously, there has been quite a significant political change across Suffolk, and I hope that in the future we can feed into your strategy as it develops. I'm not at this point able to endorse all of it, because there's some bits there that I do disagree with. But what I'm very pleased to see is the progress on rail, and certainly want to see more of that with East West and Hawley and Ely. That's great, and I'd like to push further as well. I mean, the line, I'm just going to speak about my pet idea here, but the line between Stowmarket and Norwich is underused, and there are stations there that were closed during the beaching time, and it would be good to look at potential for reopening a station between Stowmarket and Diss, and perhaps one between Diss and Norwich, somewhere around Long Stratton. Wouldn't require a single inch of new track to be laid, and certainly should be looked at as a long-term aim. One of your slides and in your strategy, it talks about reducing the need for carbon-intensive travel, but I wonder if long-term, if we are to meet our climate ambitions, that we need to think about reducing the need for travel overall. We managed to do that quite spectacularly during COVID, and I think the climate crisis is a far bigger crisis than COVID long term. So you know, looking at alternative ways of working from home, all that stuff, and simply encouraging people to travel less. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll bring in Tim for a brief comment.
It will be brief, promise you that. Got the hint there, Neil. Yeah, no, very quickly, Andrew, no, really enjoyed that presentation, very informative. The alternative fuels, I mentioned it earlier. In the police, we've got a fleet of about 700 vehicles overall. I think really interested in hydrogen, but when I was in business in Brazil, they use alcohol, industrial alcohol as well. I just wonder if you've got a contact out of this meeting, perhaps we could just liaise over that sometime, just to see how we could help. If there are any pilot projects, testing we can do, be very happy to join in with that, as it's right on our doorstep, and hopefully help show that Suffolk can lead the way. Thanks. All brief.
Yes, thank you for those comments. They're all largely in agreement on the advocacy piece, although Andy's got a few extra things in there. So we just asked to note this report. So thank you very much, Andrew Summers, for your presentation. Very interesting. And we can move on to the next item, which is criminal exploitation proposal. We have a request from the Safer, Stronger Communities Board for funding from the SPSL pot for the additional programme to tackle criminal exploitation. I'd like to invite Councillor Bobby Bennett and Claire Harvey to briefly introduce this report. And there it is, as if by magic.
Morning, everybody. I'll just top and tail, if I may, before I hand over to Councillor Bennett. So I'll skip straight to the first slide. I'm hoping to, bear with me. No, there we go. So this slide shows the community safety landscape in Suffolk, which focuses on a number of priorities which are listed in orange on that slide. And as you know, the dark blue box is the strategic direction and leadership, which sits with the Safer Strong Communities Board, with a wide representation from all the organisations here today on SPSL. Ultimately, the board provides accountability for tackling crime and disorder across Suffolk, which is a statutory function for all of us, as you know, working closely with the 3 community safety partnerships, which are shown in peach on the far right of the slide. The board has a proven track record of delivery and regular reports back to you in this group on a number of priorities, one of which is criminal exploitation, but ultimate accountability sits with you in SPSL. So the paper attached to this item refers to an umbrella term that we use called criminal exploitation, which describes a whole range of issues that are shown on the slide around drugs, violence, safeguarding, modern slavery, missing children, and what we call homegrown drug dealing. But a big part of this business model centres around county lines, and I know that you'll all be familiar with that term. In terms of what that is, that's where drugs are transported from one area to another, predominantly across county boundaries, hence the county lines name, predominantly by children and vulnerable adults who have been coerced by organised crime gangs. So the line bit of the county line refers to the mobile phone, which is used to order and sell the drugs, and that often travels up and down the country or across county boundaries with those people who are selling and controlling that mobile phone line. Much of Suffolk's county lines originate from London at the current time, but we do see others from other parts of the country, such as the West Midlands and the North East. And again, it's a very lucrative business model, quite simply based on supply and demand. But because it's so lucrative, it often comes with extreme levels of violence. And unfortunately, on occasions, sexual exploitation isn't uncommon. So what do we look for? There's some snippets on this slide, but many of the indicators of criminal exploitation in their own right don't scream that something's wrong necessarily, or that there's a need for a cause for concern. But what we know is criminal exploitation is hidden in plain sight, and because of that, it's vital that everybody, parents, carers, schools, health professionals, not only know the signs, but also know what to do once they've spotted those signs. So the funding proposal that Councillor Bennett will talk through in a moment is very much based on that early intervention, that early identification, because if we don't spot those signs early or act on them, then we lose those really good opportunities to disrupt and intervene and ultimately support those that are involved. I know you're all familiar with the video because we played that not so long ago, so I won't play the video again today, but it was produced by Surrey Police, and it's a really good way of demonstrating what might be happening in our communities and the importance of collaboration in tackling this issue together. And I'd encourage you to share it back at the ranch with your organisations to not only highlight what we're doing, but also to raise the importance of working together on this issue. And hopefully the slides will be circulated either already or certainly after the meeting, and the link is contained in there. So I'm going to hand over to Councillor Bennett, who's going to take us through the details of the proposal. Thank you.
And thank you, Claire, and I'm hoping you're okay to keep on driving the slides for me. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. For those that don't know me, my name is Bobby Bennett. I'm Cabinet Member at Suffolk County Council for Equality and Communities, and I'm here today as the Chair of the Safer Stronger Communities Board. So I'm hoping from Claire's brief introduction that you'll have a better understanding of criminal exploitation. It's a complex and serious issue. It's not unique to Suffolk. And Appendix 3 of our paper shows Suffolk is in the top 3 counties with link to county lines. And whilst I've been informed that since this paper was written, our position has improved, it is a good demonstration of how this issue affects us locally and how it ebbs and flows. As much as we'd like it to, it's not going away, and it remains a constant threat to our young people, to our vulnerable adults, and to our communities. It continues to evolve, and it feels quite relentless at times, with county lines being taken down in one part of Suffolk, appearing somewhere else close by within days or sometimes even hours. But this isn't just about county lines and gangs, it's an all-encompassing approach to criminal exploitation, which includes missing children, drug dealing, modern slavery, and all aspects of safeguarding. There's a common misconception that only boys are criminally exploited, and this is not true. Any child can be groomed and forced to carry weapons or sell drugs, and far too often girls are threatened with violence, or sexual abuse is used as a method of coercion and control. And it seems particularly timely to be here today with the National White Ribbon campaign launching this weekend, which aims to end men's violence against women, and that we recognise this devastating and life-changing impact criminal exploitation can have on all young people. We have been very fortunate in Suffolk to have received 2 previous funding allocations from SPSL, which has enabled us to deliver successful outcomes that have been independently evaluated by the Suffolk Office of Data and Analytics. There is strong governance in place through a criminal exploitation steering group who deliver the project on the ground, and oversight from the Safer Stronger Community Boards, which, as Claire said, reports directly to you here at SPSL. I'm here today to ask for further funding on behalf of the SSCB and system partners to build on what we know works, by changing, adapting what we do to ensure we are making the most of resources available across the system, and importantly, by joining up wherever possible. This proposal is a genuinely whole system approach that adds value over and above business as usual. Next slide, please. All of the work programmes to date have been rooted in evidence, and on the back of latest evaluation findings, we've chosen to adapt and evolve 3 specific areas of work that we know have a proven track record of delivery, and I'll describe those a bit more in detail shortly. Appendix 2 of the paper shows that some of the headline outcomes up to and including the first 2 years of the 3-year programme include an additional £2 million levered in through match funding from a range of sources, including in-kind staff time and European funding. We've engaged with over 6,500 young people across Suffolk through the criminal exploitation outreach model. We've trained over 2,600 people across organisations, with 96% stating they had gone on to apply the learning. And over 12,000 pupils have been reached by the One Stop Cop initiative, delivering key safety messages in our educational settings. And importantly, there have been 152 arrests, 100 drug warrants, and 20 county lines closed or removed. These metrics are helpful for us to understand progress, but I'd like you to read the 2 case studies that are in the slide pack when you receive them, because these demonstrate the importance of focusing not only on enforcement and support for young people and vulnerable adults, but clear and evidence need for prevention. For us to prevent and deter our young people from being exposed to or involved in, either as a victim or a perpetrator, and sometimes both, and the potential opportunities to intervene and ultimately reduce demand cost to the wider system. If we could have slide 8, please. I think some of the slides on my system are a bit out of order, but this slide should show a simplistic image of the new work programme. It's rooted in data and intelligence and will drive activity, and most importantly, allows for interaction and engagement from organisations across the whole of Suffolk, and that includes voluntary, public and private sector. It's designed so that we have the greatest reach possible to anyone and everyone who can play their part in helping tackle the issue. So, for example, it might be a worried parent who needs more information on where to get help from using our continually updated resources, Or it might be working with taxi drivers and GPs to raise their awareness of how to spot the signs and what they can do. Or supporting local housing teams to provide evidence for closure orders. Or helping a young person involved in criminal exploitation who needs to safely exit. The reach is county-wide and can flex depending where the need arises. We know, for example, historically, that Ipswich and the west of the county have had more activity. But in recent months, we've stood up resources in the east of the county to ensure that we collectively do all we can to deter and prevent criminal exploitation in that part of Suffolk too. So slide 9, thank you. More detail relating to the 3 specific parts of the funding request are in the paper, but the first part is a police partnerships officer who will be pivotal in ensuring all the data and intelligence across the system is used to inform the activity through the work programme. They will enable the quick time sharing of information across agencies to ensure that we spot emerging risk before it escalates and allow us to discuss a suitable multi-agency response, which might include enforcement, support into services, or disruption through the deployment of the hubs. Or it might identify a training need or an opportunity to share or change practice. Next slide, please. The second part relates to 3 criminal exploitation hubs, which will work on an outreach basis from locations which will be informed by data and intelligence. The aim is to target the places, faces and spaces where we know there may be issues or concerns, and this in order to disrupt criminal exploitation, to engage with young people where they are, and to support those that they need it into services. This isn't traditional youth work, but more workers who are skilled in contextual safeguarding and trauma-informed practice. The hubs do and will continue to work closely with district and borough councils because we know that you know your localities well and can offer insight and be involved in multi-agency discussions to address the issues. This part of the proposal also aims to work with parents who, with the right support, are well placed to identify early signs of criminal exploitation and provide protective factors around the child at home. Next slide, please. The third part of the proposal is the coordination, programme and performance management and system oversight that is essential for any large complex work programme like this. This resource will lead and drive activity, plus spotting gaps, removing barriers and escalating issues where needed. Alongside this, there will be a new and refreshed training offer, but we will be considerably scaling back from previous years, taking the opportunity to build on good knowledge base from our previous programmes and using the new ways of working, such as more online resources, webinars, podcasts, and other updated resources to keep momentum and to keep people up to speed with the ever-changing issue. Next slide, please. We are still 4 months away from the end of the current work programme, but the intention is to develop a new outcomes framework for the new programme, which will ensure we are able to measure and progress outcomes following the outcome of this request today. We also have the support of the Suffolk Office of Data and Analytics to ensure we continue to evaluate and assess effectiveness of the work programme going forward. And next slide, last slide, thank you. So the request for funding today is for £1.4 million over 3 years, with match or in-kind funding secured to date of £677,000, and we intend a go-live date of April the 1st, 2024. We have dedicated the December meeting of the Safer Stronger Communities Board to agree and sign off the final details of the new programme, but if we're not successful in securing funding for these proposals, officers will wind down the current programme to end in March 2024 as planned. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that presentation. I've got a forest of hands already. So we've got Cliff, followed by John, followed by Tim.
Thanks very much, Neil. Thanks very much, Bobby and your colleague for that presentation. Very, very informative. Claire, sorry. And very powerful. And I know from the work that officers in my own council are doing that it is really vital work, and it's very effective too. Unfortunately, it's one of those things that's never going to be that you stop something. It's always going to be a battle against something that keeps coming back and coming back and coming back. So I think it's really important that we build resilience up in this area. And I totally support your bid, and I'll certainly be supporting. My only perhaps thought about that is that really it feels like something that should not be something that has to be bid for. This should be something that is a core of our approach to policing, and it should not be dependent, as you said at the end of your presentation, on decisions made by people who've got very limited budgets and got lots of other priorities. So, going forward, it would be nice to see that dealing with this issue was something that didn't have to come with a begging bowl to a group like this, but was actually treated as core funding. But certainly I will support this wholeheartedly. Thank you very much, both of you.
Yeah, thank you, Cliff. John?
Yeah, thanks, Bobby and Claire. Unfortunately, this is something that we have to keep supporting, have to keep up. We can't let the programme wind down. It's not going to go away. I understand Cliff's comments about how it should be funded in future, but in the meantime, we do need to support this proposal and allocate the funding here. The thing that really concerns me, obviously, and you've touched on it, is the missing children, because only yesterday evening on Look East they were talking about how Suffolk has a very high rate of long-term absenteeism from schools, and somehow we've got to address that and work through schools and other agencies so that these children don't slip through the net and fall into exploitation. The other thing I just wanted to, it's kind of a comment and a question, and that is how can we join up more with the Metropolitan Police and West Midlands Police to tackle a lot of these gangs at source in London and the Midlands, because once they get to Suffolk, it's our problem, yes, but we need to work on the source and nipping it in the bud before it gets as far as the county.
Would you like me to come back on either of those comments, Chair?
Yes, please.
Well, I will leave the police one to Tim, who I think has probably much more insight than me on the way that the police work up over our county boundaries, but I don't think they do that very effectively. But Tim, if you wouldn't mind commenting on that from your perspective, I'd appreciate it. And in terms of the funding, one of the strengths of this programme is that it is genuinely a partnership approach, and it's very much over business as usual, and that is why I think the officers feel it is very appropriate use of the pooled business rates, because this is the place that brings Suffolk Public Sectors to leader, and this is a Suffolk-wide approach.
Okay, thank you for that update.
Thanks, Neil, and thanks, Bobby and Claire, for your powerful presentation. I really do mean that, everybody. Of course, it goes without saying that I'm absolutely right behind this initiative. I do remember when this first came up over 6 years ago, and we had real problems in Ipswich, and there aren't very many people on this meeting who remember that formative day, but we have made huge progress. But my goodness me, the threat still exists, as we've heard from all over the county. And one thing I would just like to add to on the funding side, that pie chart with all the other organisations around the periphery, just from our point of view, the PCC office, some of the grants, crime disorder and reduction grants, we give, trying to do an awful lot with young people. I know it's never enough, but it does all complement what we're trying to do. It's a really, really serious threat. I don't know if anybody saw the news last night, but this came up with our public meeting last week. This new synthetic opioid, nitazene, is highly, highly toxic. It's damn dangerous, actually. If you find it, you have to. It's manufactured in the UK. I think the Met found a place somewhere in London that was making this. It's so addictive. If you actually get this stuff in its raw state, you need to wear nitrile gloves or other protective clothing to deal with it. And they're mixing it in with other opioids that come from elsewhere in the world. And the threat of this, I think, potentially is absolutely devastating. And I'm not trying to exaggerate this, so it's early days yet, but that's one of the reasons we need to keep this going. And we all know it could affect any of our friends and relations. It's not specific. It can hit any community, any family, any individual. So we need to do what we can. So I shall certainly be supporting this. On your point, Cliff, about funding, I entirely agree with you. But you know what really wound me up about the Home Office a few years ago, just on occasions? We had a fund, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, 120 million quid of taxpayers' money. Yes, we'll make sure every force in England and Wales, the 43 forces, will get something. We got not a penny in Suffolk. They got funding in Norfolk. They got funding in Essex. And I think one of the problems, therefore, is there is a displacement. It's easier for criminal gangs to target other areas and so on. And of course, you get displacement. That was really annoying. They had violence reduction units. We didn't get anything. Project Adder, these sorts of things. But nevertheless, we are where we are. I think John mentioned that. So I really would urge everybody to support this. There has been some very good work, and we need to continue. And certainly when it comes to our grants and work with the 3 CSPs, we shall continue to do what we possibly can to support various initiatives with voluntary and charitable sectors, trying to help in a limited extent for us about school exclusions. That's really, really important on the vulnerability side. So there's a heck of a lot going on. But I think the great thing about this, as both Bobby and Claire have said, it is about joining together across agencies, cut the politics out of it. I don't give a damn about that. It's about what we try and do collectively. And I know everybody is doing what they possibly can. And we will get there, but we just need to continue it. So thank you for that, Neil, and give me the chance to say that.
Thank you for those points, Tim. Is everyone happy that we allocate the funding requested? If so, please raise your virtual hand or your actual hand. Yes. Before I raise mine as well. So we're carried on that one. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thanks,
Claire.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Something
Thank you
we'll
very
have to
much.
carry on forever, I suspect. So if we can move on to the next agenda item, the proposal for investment to enhance 5G provision across Suffolk. And I'm hoping, Paul, you can give us a high-level introduction to this so we can catch up a bit of time on the agenda. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So you mean go fast? I will do my best.
Give us the highlight.
Good morning, good morning, colleagues. They're all highlights. Good morning, colleagues. I'm joined also by Toby Warren. Given the time constraints, I will be referring to certain parts of this proposal in the paper which you've had. I will focus, if I may, in a very abbreviated way, on the rationale of the current situation and the prospective operation of this Digital Champions group. And Toby will, if he has time, quickly run through our desired outcomes from it. Fundamentally, we are looking for investment in a 3-year campaign of £38,500 per year. This is a partnership collegiate campaign that the Suffolk system does so well to give Suffolk businesses a competitive advantage in generating sustainable prosperity and therefore their communities enjoying the benefits of that sustainable prosperity through being at the forefront of investment in digital infrastructure. The aim of the group essentially is to raise awareness, to facilitate knowledge transfer, and to provide lobbying heft to the mobile operators and other players, and also to Whitehall and Westminster in ensuring that Suffolk's case is well understood and well made. Chair, although I'll be focusing predominantly on 5G, I think this group has an opportunity to work with others in addressing the very many 4G hotspots that remain in the county, but also raising awareness and support for digital assets that the county has invested in more broadly, including LoRaWAN and similar assets. In short, 5G is a step change. It represents far more than just better voice and data. For many companies, it offers an opportunity to accelerate productivity, improve their use of assets, and to improve their R&D turnaround times. But nationwide, we are facing a situation of mild to moderate market failure, where the mobile operators won't invest unless they can have a return, and businesses won't invest in technologies that rely on 5G infrastructure because the 5G infrastructure isn't there. I may refer members to page 38 of our report. You can see there the existing penetration of 5G infrastructure, where it is particularly low in our rural areas and market towns. In terms of research that the Chamber has conducted with businesses, awareness levels are still pretty low, which is a concern in terms of growth going forward. And many of those companies who are aware of the step change that 5G offers are waiting, understandably, upon the operators to invest accordingly. And there's a quote from a medium-sized company which says as follows, and summarises the situation: we need to have confidence that 5G is actually going to be available to design our new systems and ways of working. We've consulted with the mobile network operators and their trade body, and fundamentally, the way to engage with them is through improving a coordinated process of business awareness and demand, and political leadership and support. If I may turn to page 39 of the report, and I'll draw out a few sort of key functions that we see this proposed digital champions group discharging. It will become a strategic point of contact for all stakeholders to speed up the understanding of 5G, to act to build awareness of the advantages of 5G to businesses through sharing best practice, arranging site visits and distributing case studies, to support, crucially, the allied issue of the awareness of digital skills, which will underpin the longer term success and utilisation of 5G technologies. We hope it'll be a catalyst for prospective future bids to government, and building on the Innovation Regions bid that the Chamber and many others contributed to recently. And fundamentally, it's to ensure that Suffolk is not at the back of the queue. We are very much aware of many other areas, including colleagues in Essex, who operate a similar scheme, and we do not want Suffolk's voice and businesses and communities to competitively suffer as a result. So in short, we see the group being very broad-based, certainly focused on businesses, but with the support of SPSL, of SCOLT, planners, landowners more generally, to ensure there is a coordinated approach taken by the Suffolk system to ensure that 5G rollout, as well as other digital opportunities, are not missed or only belatedly picked up by Suffolk. Chairman, I don't know if I fulfilled your brief, but I don't know how many minutes Toby's got left to just to go through the outcomes. Toby, perhaps, Chair.
Yes, my outcomes would be good.
Thank you, Chair. The outcome will be that we'll have more 5G enabled services. For example, when it comes to business, better management of freight and construction traffic movements, and that will have also the benefit of not just reducing transport costs, but also hopefully reducing congestion on our strategic road network and other roads. Also, of course, better public services. 5G is ideal for remote monitoring and predictive maintenance in the public sector, for example, on highways. And of course, predictive maintenance of machinery is important in both the public and the private sector. And of course, if we're getting public and private sector to be starting to want these uses, then the mobile network operators are much more likely to engage productively with local planning authorities and come out with a strategy to roll out 5G across Suffolk rather than waiting until we're last in the queue. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Toby. We certainly wouldn't want to be last in the queue. Tim Passmore is first in the queue again. Is it a brief point, Tim?
Yes, I did. Just to say, I fully support this, and I think it's really important, not just for business, which is crucial, getting the economy going. I really do think it will help, from what I know, to help to transform and really improve public sector productivity, something we've got to do. Resources are tight, but putting some money in here from the pool business rate to support this initiative has my 110% support.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, I fully support this. Obviously, we've had some of the huge business benefits articulated, but also you've got to remember for domestic consumers, it's a viable alternative where they can't get ultra fast fibre to the premises broadband. With 5G, you've got speeds between 10 and perhaps up to 30 times 4G connectivity over the mobile networks, and so it'd be transformative for our residents as well. One thing we do need to as part of the working with the mobile network operators is to try and to encourage a greater, faster rollout, is to encourage more sharing of infrastructure. If there's anything we can do there to achieve that. In terms of planning, obviously a lot of the infrastructure is covered by the permitted development, and there has been a relaxation with the new permitted development order of 2022 last year, which increased the height of masts, which I think is essential, necessary for effective 5G coverage. But yeah, anything we can do to help work with planning departments and liaise between planning departments and the MNOs would be very beneficial. But yeah, I support this 100%.
Thank you, John. Cliff.
I think Matthew's before me. Matthew.
Oh,
right,
sorry.
thanks. Yeah, likewise. Look, I've said this before to us all, but everyone tells me 5G is transformational. A lot of it I don't understand the technology behind it, but if it's something that we know is needed, we know it will make a real significant difference, and I think we should all get right behind this, working in partnership with the Chamber to do all we can to bring this forward at great speed to Suffolk. We need it, it's a benefit, and it shows business that we're working with them and supporting them. So I'm absolutely supportive.
Thank you. Cliff.
Yeah, thanks very much, Neil. Yeah, like Matthew, I'm not a technical expert by any means, but I do know that there is some a large amount of disquiet amongst the public about 5G. And I think part of the problem is because it's so hyper local, so that people see the masts coming up right next to their house. And I know we've had quite a bit of comment here at West Suffolk from our residents about this. And given the fact that we still haven't got 4G in many parts, which is a far less contentious technology, then I'm afraid I'm going to oppose this expenditure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Cliff. Obviously, in Ipswich, we have the highest level of 5G coverage, which is 82%. So obviously, I'm very supportive of promoting it to the business community here. So can we move to a vote then? Is anyone in favour, please show. That's 6 in favour. And Cliff, can you indicate that you're against? As you said a minute ago. So it's still carried, but we know your opposition. So thanks, Paul and Toby, for presenting to us. I look forward to working with you in the future. So we can move on to the next agenda item 7, proposal for investment in collaborative climate change, environment and energy projects. And we have recently seen this report and presentation. I do believe we should show the slides in the public session so the public can get a chance to see them. So I just wondered if we could have a brief run through the slides.
Certainly, Chair. I'll share my screen, share the slides now, and I think Councillor Smart will be introducing the item. Thanks.
Yes, thanks. So obviously, I know you're pushed for time, so I'll push on with my introduction. So my name's Phil Smart. I'm an elected member of Ipswich Borough Council, have been for a number of years. I'm with you today in my capacity as Vice Chair of the Environment Portfolio Holders Group, and I bring with me apologies from Councillor Kelly, who is the chair, but unfortunately unable to be with us. I'm supported today by Chris Bally,
Chief Executive at East Suffolk, who's obviously in the meeting, and Steve Palfrey, who you've just heard from. So perhaps if we can get up the next slide. We're here to do a couple of things. First of all, to provide you with your regular 6-monthly update on progress to date on the joint work to help households, communities and businesses across Suffolk in their efforts to reduce carbon emissions, but also to seek funding for a package of projects to further support Suffolk's transition to net zero. You've already had the paper that's been circulated, but in slide format. Perhaps it's a bit easy for the public to digest, and Chris and Steve will take you through those now.
Thanks very much. Yeah, so just very quickly, just a bit of context to the proposals that you're about to see. So the public sector leaders has committed in their individual organisations to being net zero by 2030, and so the focus of this isn't about what we do and where we spend the money in our own organisations. There's